So I wanted to make a video in regards to morality and how I believe that morality is a privilege. Furthermore, I think that there's no such thing as a good person. I think that we all fall short in one way or another. And oftentimes we like to point the finger at other people and the issues or the shortcomings they have in life to cope with our current situation or justify the things that we do. So more on like morality being a privilege. There's different privileges you have in life. Maybe it's food, security, financial stability, stability in general, comfort, things like that, right? And it's really, really easy to do the moral thing and to have a strong moral compass and to stand by that when you have all these, different privileges. And so when you start to take some of those away, or you're in a situation full of pressure where you don't have the luxury of comfort, maybe you um, don't have enough money to buy food. You have to pay, the electric bill before you get the food, whatever it is. All of a sudden, your moral justification in your mind shifts. And so if you actually look it up, there's a part in your brain called the prefrontal cortex. This is the part of your brain that is responsible for morality. It's what we use to make decisions based off of, or I guess the better way to phrase it would be in relation to morality. And that actually gets taken over by the part of your brain called the amygdala, which is responsible for survival in times of pressure. Now, the issue is that we've advanced so much as society that in our brains haven't caught up. Or not even as society, but in the phase of technology, right? We've advanced so much that our brains don't really comprehend what really is survival and not, because our brains just don't get the idea that there's, things like, medical assistance and things of this nature. So it will start to overreact. In other words, meaning that oftentimes it's pretty easy to tap into situations where the amygdala is actually going to overtake the prefrontal cortex. Now, the reason that this is significant is because let's say you're you're out and there's somebody who is being aggressive out and they're kind of like making you nervous or whatever. Now you yourself are like some big pacifist, right? You don't believe in war, you don't believe in fighting, you don't believe in violence or anything. Now, when you're in a situation where you're faced with somebody who is a physical threat to you, you're losing that privilege of comfort and security, right? And so all of a sudden, your brain is going to go into that fight or flight mode to some extent. Obviously, in this case, not literally survival, and it's going to legitimately, what happens is your brain can justify if you were to act out and get physical with this person, because it's going to justify and saying, hey, I needed to make myself safe, stuff like that. And now, obviously, that's an extreme example where a lot of times you would be like, yeah, self-defense or something like that, and that situation is good, right? But the truth is, there's many more complex situations than that you can find yourself in life, and that are going to push, your morality. And so one of the things I look at sometimes is like how celebrities or elitists or like CEOs, like really wealthy people that have high social status, I feel like you always see them get like super political or like often voice about social issues going on and whatnot. And they always try to act like they're always like, oh, like I'm so good, or like I'm super like moral and a good person. And they're like, hey, like listen to this group of people, this marginalized group of people, and do this. But like that's so easy to say when you literally have the most privilege out of anybody. Um, and kind of why I'm saying that is because things that we deem are unmoral become logical when you're put in those situations where these sort of privileges are taken away. And when you're at a certain level, obviously there's different levels and thresholds to this, and I would even consider myself on one of the higher levels. I'm at this point where I'm, for the most part, financially secure. I have access to food, I have access to shelter, things like that, right? um all of a sudden, like it's so easy for me to be like, oh yeah, I'll take some time and go to the food shelter and volunteer and do this. But, the guy who is living paycheck to paycheck and needs to support his kids, he might not have time for that. And so there's give and take with this. But what I'm trying to say, and the point I'm trying to make, is that it's all based off your situation, the privileges that you have. These people, I see a lot of people in general, including myself, we like to point the finger at somebody else. It's super easy. I think a common one that most people do is like Trump. They'll be like, oh, Trump, look at him. Oh, he's so bad. But the truth is, these people, they're not seriously interested in Trump himself. What they're really interested in is making themselves feel better for the faults in their lives, right? The shortcomings in their lives. And the thing is, we all have that. We all have these shortcomings, and none of us are perfect. But it's almost like in our brains, we can once again justify things if we, point the finger at the person next to us, at our neighbor, and say, "Oh, they're doing far worse." Like to me, it seems really like one of the interesting things I always thought in my whole life was like, why is everybody so obsessed with like Hitler? Like, why does everybody keep bringing him up? Like, yeah, he was a bad guy, but why is this one guy randomly like continuously in conversations where it's like people want to like make themselves feel better, but like Hitler was doing this, or like, yeah, it's like, bro, what are we talking about? Like, what is the standard we're going to compare ourselves to? you know so I just start to think about these sort of things, and I'm just like questioning, like, none of us are truly aware, or I guess like really think about how our brain justifies things. So our brain's going to justify um, things differently in different situations, right? If you have a friend or even yourself, and you want to figure out, where does your morality actually stand? Where does your friend's morality stand? Put yourself or your friend in this uncomfortable situation, or maybe not put them in, but just wait until they get in that situation, then analyze, right? And um, you're really gonna learn who people are, not over time, but actually over pressure. So pressure reveals character faster than time. It's not really hard to if you have this diet, for example, and you really want to stick to the diet, but guess what? Your birthday is going to be on Friday, and you want to do it for the whole week, Monday through Sunday. You can justify, you're like, it's my birthday today. Like, I think it's okay if I do this and that. But that's the one day where the diet and actually matters the most, is because it's pretty much the only day where you're actually being tried, if you get what I'm saying. Like, in the face of adversity, or that's not even like in that situation, that's not real adversity, but you get what I'm saying, right? Like when push finally comes to shove, when you're actually being faced with a thing, that's when you really realize what you're made of. So if you want to know what your own morals are, analyze your thought process when you're in that tough situation. You always would say, I'll stick up for somebody if they're being bullied or something like that. But then let's wait and see, when somebody's actually out, when you're out in public and somebody is being really aggressive towards someone else, and not, it doesn't have to be physically, it can be aggressive or whatever. Are you actually willing to put yourself in a situation where you can then be targeted, to stand up for somebody else? We all like to think we would. It's like, I know a lot of guys probably feel the same way, where you've definitely thought in your head where it's like, oh, like if there was a school threat and they came into the building, you're like, oh, I would definitely try to take them down. I try to tackle them. I try to do this. But when you're actually put in that situation, push comes to shove, you're not doing anything. I'm not doing anything, right? And so we all like to believe and say that we would do something, or we all like to donate when we have the funds to donate. But when our situation changes, our morality changes, our brain can justify the choices that we're making and the morality that we have based off the privileges that we're given in a certain moment. And so, in closing, like, I don't think anybody's a good person. And one thing I want to add at the end of this video is that, if I am imperfect, I've lied in my life. I lied to my parents earlier this week. So how can I point the finger at so-and-so and say, wow, you did X, Y, and Z? Like, that's a terrible thing to do. Like, I'm not going to look at Donald Trump and be like, oh, wow, look, I'm so much better than this guy. I'm not going to look at Hitler and be like, oh, wow, I'm so much better than this guy. Because what is it, first off, what does that have to do with me? It's my life is about improving myself, not comparing myself to others. But also like it's just cope for us saying like, oh, it's okay that I'm kind of bad because they're very bad. This is a terrible way to look at life, and you can't look at it. None of us are perfect, and none of us are good people. We all committed sins. We all fall short of the glory of God. None of us are perfect. The hand of judgment is in Christ and Christ alone. And I actually even struggle with the idea of like courts, because obviously you don't want to let serial killers out on the loose, but like I don't think any human is fit to judge another human. It just doesn't make sense to me, because none of us are perfect, right? It's like if life was math in a math class, right? The thing is that you would want your algebra professor to know everything there is about algebra. I think that's a fair um, desire or situation that you would want, right? You want your professor to know how to do every step of a problem. But now let's put this into perspective. Let's say they're not good at like one thing, right? They don't know how to do this equation. They don't know how to calculate this, right? You're no longer going to believe them for literally any of algebra. You're no longer in that class going to trust what your teacher says, because you're like, oh, if they don't know this, how am I sure they know this? And it just seems like they're not qualified because, if they're a teacher in that. And it's the same thing in life, where it's like, if one person is imperfect, how can they look at their neighbor and say, ooh, you did this wrong or you did this wrong? Because we're all, in life, we all have different privileges. It's the truth. I know I have many great privileges, and I know you watching this video have many great privileges, even if you think like, I don't care what situation you're in. You could be homeless, you could have diseases, you could have all this stuff, but guess what? You live in 2025 and in a time period where there's, healthcare out there, and there's the internet and all these different things. So you could be in these terrible situations. You still have a better privilege than 99.9% of humans who have ever lived, literally just by living in the year 2025, right? And so I guess what I'm trying to say here is just be aware that, your mind will justify things differently based off the situation you're in. And when you're, look to judge your neighbor, just understand their mind is in a completely different ballpark, and it's functioning at a different level, because they have different privileges than you do, and they might have less or different or whatever it may be. But we must understand that, morality is a privilege, and things are going to change based off of your situation. I feel like I'm really like reiterating repeating myself here many times. But I would challenge you as the viewer to question, does it make sense for me to judge other people and point my fingers at other people when I myself am imperfect? And for me, the answer is unequivocally no. Like, it doesn't make sense. I have my own issues I'm working on. So just food for thought.